surfing?
So I grew up in Palos Verdes, but I came from the east, via the train, the Santa Fe across the desert to the LA station downtown, and then my parents, my father had been here first, so he was working at Northrop on the Flying Wing, and so we lived in there for a year, and I went to school there, and then that summer came and we moved out to Palos Verdes into a new house that my grandfather had built for us. So being there in this, out on this Lanada Bay Peninsula, which, and so this is like 52 or something like that, and so that wasn't long ago, and they expected the Japanese to arrive there in Palos Verdes and take over LA.
Yeah, right.
The first thing my parents do is that I'm going to this little grammar school, Malaga Cove Grammar School, and so I end up going to the Boy Scouts, or no, it was Cub Scouts at that point, and all the parents are there, and these two new guys there that lived in my community that I had seen, who were older, and so that would be within my neighborhood, and so it was Phil Becker and Jared Eaton. So Jared's brother, Mike, then was the one who was into surfing at that point, and Velzy's hot rods and all that stuff that he had bought, So where we all started there at 11, I was probably 11 and 12, and they were always 3 years older. So that day came, where they invited me to go down to the cove, to surf on this big plank, what do you call it? A Tom Blake.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. And so I went through this adventure, of this carting this big, huge board, these three little guys, down to the bottom. And then, the most interesting part of it is it's this three people, which seems to be a very, it's like the three people in The Endless Summer. It always seems to be three, because one can act as the negative, and
mm-hmm.
the other one can act as the positive, in the sort of jealousy of these, three boys, in their activities.
Yeah, I always call it that three thing, because it's out there.
Yeah, so it becomes competitive within that,
mm-hmm.
So, the skateboard comes through, of all people, Ekstrom and Burns, who come up from La Jolla, and Burns had lived in PV. So Bob Burns, the older brother, was a friend of Mike's again, so we would see them around the hot rod and the Velzy surfboards and the old Spanish kind of mansion that they lived in. So the skateboards went everywhere for a couple of years, and then I was probably around 12. Then came the big deal, where they had cars, or
right.
we found somebody who could drive us or somewhere, it's this guy Dawson, and so he had a big truck, and we piled all the surfboards in there, and we went on a surfing trip to Rincon, and that was the introduction,
In your book, you talk about the skateboard thing. Just
yeah.
finish this because it really spoke to me, because I've done a lot of interviews and skateboarding's always been a part of it.
Yeah.
But not everybody had the same experience I had in you, because you go ahead and describe your first skateboard.
Yeah, so Becker is over there sawing up a 2x4, and taking these skates, and then with a hammer, hammering these big, huge nails into these two ends of the device that holds the wheels, and bending it over, and then propping it up, But then he goes back in there and he takes out the rubber kind of stopper,
uh-huh.
goes, and
you have to have a little carpet,
yeah,
because of the nails, right? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And you even talk about
the nails it was all bare.
But on the deck.
It was just just pounded down.
Yeah, so it was so thick that the nail didn't.
Right,
come
it was a
through,
2x4.
Gotcha, it wasn't like
Okay.
plywood.
So
right.
so 3 3/4
Sure.
by 1 7, 1 3/4. So and maybe sandpaper was put on top of it at times, you know,
grip.
yeah, a little grip.
And I think you also talked about how you had to break the skate.
Yeah.
Because it didn't just unbolt to get two halves.
Right.
And
So after seeing this at Becker's house, then I went home, and then I had a pair of old skates, you know, and I cut up the 2x4, and then put my skates on there, and I, you know, being 2.5 years younger, I arrive, you know, with my skateboard. Okay. In this competition, you know.
Yeah, right. You're in.
So we're both getting haircuts together, you know. I mean, so we're all wearing these sort of flat tops with what they call a French butch, you know, and the jeans and the t-shirts, and you know, everything is like this California lifestyle, you know. And Palos Verdes doesn't have very much in it, you know. But these long roads to civilization, you know. And we're out in this rural setting, you know, but we do have the cove, and we do have the, you know, the Leonardo Bay Point, you know. So as kids, we spent a lot of time on the Leonardo Bay Point, you know, going through the rocks, picking up, you know, shells and things like that. And the biggest desire, you know, was to get a seal's tooth, you know. So Becker, you know, found one, you know, and he carved that thing out, you know, and he put it around his neck. He was the very creative guy, you know. He was sort of the instigator of anything creative, you know, anything to change whatever was going on, you know. So then we would attend the Cub Scouts, then the Boy Scouts, you know, up until like 14 or something like that. And the surfing became really big, and then I was 16 and I had my own car. And I had met this guy, Bob Wallace, at high school, the Bags, you know, who later became the Bags. So I was his buddy. He was probably maybe a year older. We were still in the same grade. We were in the same art class. And I would forge notes, and we would leave to, you know, go over to Velzy's, which was very close, across from El Segundo across the Bologna Creek Bridge, and into Playa del Rey, but it was, I don't know what it was called at that time.
Right.
So then we would hang out with Velzy and get all these stories from a very interesting perspective, which was that we had to smoke these Camel cigarettes and drink this kind of wine out of these big, huge bottles, and you had to pull it over your shoulder.
The jug, yeah.
Old Chateau, I think it was called, you know, and these, you know, and then Munoz would show up, or Dora would show up, you know, all these really older guys, you know. And it was just a fairy tale, like a fantasy of this kind of new world. And so as the surfing became my strength, you know, and the territories that I covered made the high school scene look like really flat, you know, and had no emotion to it whatsoever, except maybe some fights and all that. But I, you know, on Friday I was gone, and I was back on Monday, you know, to school, and so I had my parents didn't know, people in the high school didn't know what I had kind of personally accomplished, you know, as a young kid between 16 and 18, something like that. Even we were, you know, and they were all older, so I was like 18, so I was able to look 21. So, you know, 15 or something like that. You would see Kemp Alberg, you know, would arrive, or Lance Carson. Yeah. Lance's dad worked at Northrop. We both knew each other through that. And when I went south, you know, to Windansea, you know, that was an entirely different pose. These guys would, Wayne Land, you know, and Fisher would show up. You know, it was, you know, like a peak, and you just had to pose yourself in a different way. You know, so from the north, you know, the northern colonials to the southern colonials, is that you had to sometimes adapt your style to these waves. So,
which would be
Trussell's was different than Malibu. You know, it was faster, it was quicker. You know, and then Windansea was a peak. You know, that you could go left or right, but it's a different pose that you had to adapt to. So the monkeys are watching. You know.
So true. And then little microcosms like Laguna Beach.
Yes.
You know, where there's those particular individuals.
Yeah, Bobby Patterson on the nose. That was always a scene, just amazing. Little tiny guy. Ronald, his brother, then was like a bodyguard for me, because I was so tall and skinny. My head was above everybody, and those little fists would come out of the crowd. And so he would block it with these kicks and these amazing
What kind of situations were those?
parties.
Parties, yeah.
Which, everyone was drunk.
So fights are going to happen.
And we, Easter would come, and when we were in high school, and Henry and Dewey and all those guys from 22nd Street would say, "Okay, we're going to go to San Clemente again." So we'd arrive in the San Clemente Park, and across what was a 2-lane road probably at that time, before the freeway and all that, was a liquor store, which then the liquor store is still there, the same one, but they would sell to us, So inside the park there, then it would turn into this contest, just again enviable, ways of finding something above everybody, who could drink the most. So these 5 quarts of beer going down, and the throwing up and all that, and then the next day having to walk from San Clemente down to Cotton's Point, when there's really no surf, it was just funny.
But you're there, so
yeah,
you're going to do it.
Yeah. But the team was there, or the group, the monkeys were there.
So,
but the Thalia Street was just a kind of place that was serene, and tucked away, and the wind was always dropped there, and they had those kelp beds keeping it smooth inside, and then the reef would operate in an interesting way, between low and high tide.
sure,
and all that.
right. Depending on the swell direction and all that stuff.
Yeah.
That was my spot growing up.
Yeah, and that seemed to be the whole show. Yet I heard that there were other things going on, but again, the tribe. Laguna had this sort of pretentiousness to it, this kind of
that
art
you picked
scene.
up on.
Yeah, and it was like an idealism that was kind of voodoo. You didn't want to be around it, and the and it was tourism. On Saturdays and Sundays it was just on. It was a traffic jam. And then during the summer you had that Sawdust Festival. I don't know if they called it at that time, but the living paintings were
Pageant of the Masters.
Pageant of the Masters, and and beatniks.
Well, it was Laguna,
and surfing was so straight at that time. There was the drinking and the games and the fun and all that. The rascals that surfers were at that time. The fights, the challenges, the waves, this and that, But essentially, when it came to Laguna, it was like an exotic place, but not necessarily something that you like to be on just sitting there at Thalia Street.
Mm-hmm. And what period was this? 58 to 62?
Yeah, this is within the 50s.
Still within the 50s.
Yeah. Come back into, and I did that twice a week. So, and it's 60 miles in town from Dana Point. So
Bit of a commute.
It was like cherry picking. You could take all this wonderful information, you go back to this rural, backward place, and where all these surfers were still square, and
where the more advanced people were at school.
Yeah.
Not down on the beach.
No, not at the beach.
Who were pioneering this stuff.
Right.
But still.
Right. But then, we'll do this, which is, so I lived on El Encanto, and the PCH is going, through Dana Point, and so in El Encanto, you go up the hill, and there's this little Spanish house that the postmaster had owned, so I rented that from him. Had a garage that I could paint in, and it had lobsters brought to the door, during the R months.
Sure, right.
And I had the wife there for a little bit and the child, and then they left. But down the street, was this guy Tinker, who was from El Segundo, from my earlier years in the 50s. And Tinker and these, Joey Severson, moved in there, which was really against John's better judgment, which immediately, Joey got into smoking, pot there. They were all smoking pot, and they were all jazz beatniks. They were right down the street there, and I drive by it every day. And the wife had been down there smoking with them, and God only knows what she got into there. But she left town and went to Berkeley or something, I think, go to school. So, and this infamous kind of like a block house. It was like blue, square, 12 feet high, something like that, with a flat roof and a door. And I think they would hose it out, literally, cement floor, and had these couches. It was just a very raw beatnik scene, And then he had like an international truck that was a vintage, this big, huge thing. He would put his surfboard on that, and he wasn't a good surfer, and he had, had acne over his whole body, just really an eccentric case, but he was a magnet for all these scenes, So when I leave there to go back to school, and to Chenard, I've really had like a little taste there,
Sure.
Of what is about to come, where that was fairly, it wasn't. I mean, Joey Cabell would go by there, a lot. They would, the surf scene was going through that door, and they were spending time in there. So I was really seeing the edge of a transition there, So then I get into town, but I'm sort of like disallowed. Well, I've done the Endless Summer, which again is just going back and forth to Art Center, and I do this poster for R. Paul Allen, who became a friend there, and I get this little check for $150, and I've done this poster, and I move back to town, and then I go against all of the worst reasons, to John Severson. I start up this thing with Bill Cleary and go to work for Surf Guide, and I had Bill in front of me there at Topanga Beach, and I'm explaining to him, Bill, there's a big transition happening here in surf. It's not the same. It's a very commercial world now. I mean, even though we're sitting in this factory where there's Macaw skateboards on one side and there's this surf magazine on the other side, this is part of it, but there's a whole entirely larger thing happening. And so why don't we just interview Henry Ford and Mickey Dora and Kemp Ahlberg and hear what happened to soul surfing. So the magazine becomes this beautiful, kind of confessional about commercialism, and it sells out, right? And Severson goes through the roof, and he's threatening everybody. And he threatened me. He said, through Bev Morgan, he said, "You'll never work again. Come back to Surfer, and you, Bill, you come to work for us." So Bill did eventually do that, but I took it seriously. I talked to my parents, and I said, "I'm going back to art school. Forget this thing." And so then I arrived there with Griffin, in that transition.
So here you are in Chenard, and you and Rick, and what?
He wrote up a paragraph, and I had to alter everything and put this plug in there, so that people could read about what the Endless Summer was. So by the time it gets in '66, but by the time it's being a hit there's a guy named Martin Geisler, who owns a poster distribution company called Personality Posters, and he has he's developing a market, and so he goes to Utah and he picks up this Beatle poster, and he goes out to New Jersey and he prints up this big 30 by 41 sheet of the Endless Summer. He's chopped off all the other extraneous stuff, borders and everything, and you have the rich image there, and the typography of which I had hand lettered there in Dana Point on my kitchen table, and the shot taken at Salt Creek that I've cut and moved it together to make it just right, and then having this modernist geometry, block color, put into the background, it just became a number of different. We're right on the edge. The poster now is in a show called California Design, which is living in a modern way, and so you have Charles Ames and Loewy and all the great modernists of that era, and their color and their form and all those sorts of things that are modernism. And then at the end of the show, as you come around towards the end, there's an Endless Summer, the 1965 sheet, with the type on it and the poster and all that, but it's huge, it's a large poster. And that is the beginning of the postmodern age, you walk past that Day-Glo color, that structure of the end of modernism, and this new kind of layer of enthusiasm put on it that becomes the postmodern world. It's a fabulous thing to experience.
When you say you hand lettered, you mean?
Well, I took type class, and when I was at Art Center, I took lettering classes. So we had to make everything ourselves.
There weren't lots of fonts that you could access.
They took you out to, in the first semester, they took you out to type shops to see all those sorts of things. But essentially, there were other classes where you had to learn how to do it yourself, because so much of the work had to be what they called comps. So you were presenting, kind of a almost rendition, and typography didn't have photo faces at that point. It was still all pretty difficult, to work with.
Right.
The type houses, were complicated.
You kind of had to be an artist.
Yes.
To do it.
Well, yes,
right.
Well, you couldn't get into the school
lettering,
unless you drew.
Yes, exactly.
Today you don't have to draw.
What do you remember from that Salt Creek shoot? How do you remember that going?
Oh well, it's always good. So I'm setting up. I have this experience of illustrating. That I've learned about composition and all that, and so I've shot down there before, trying to come up with some compositions. So I set the composition, and so we put Bruce in the foreground, in which people never knew it was him, And for some odd reason, he cocked his foot, as if he was taking a step rather than having it solid, And we had to argue over that, And Bagley was back there with a 4x5.
Left foot or the right foot?
It would be the right foot.
Right foot was cocked out a little bit?
He wanted it like steady.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, sort of like it's deformed.
It would have been up on toe or something. Like he was ready to.
So that's the right side or left side? Left side.
Over here?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so it was his left foot he wanted to kind of.
Yeah. As if he was walking.
Okay, right. Make it more realistic.
Right. So. But then, the line resolution just destroyed the continuous tone, so that narrative kind of left. And they weren't ready for that. That, taking the narrative away and becoming symbolic. And they're scratching the head all the way through the whole thing.
Through your.
Yeah, they just
shoot. What do we do? How do we have the stuff?
Yeah. What are you doing?
You're giving them ideas.
Yeah, they went to signage companies for their posters before that, and they're printed on cardboard, and there were special sign houses that did that kind of work, So this would be new for them.
So it was
to actually have a custom thing that they were actually involved in and paying for.
From all the Bruce's prior movies and things.
Yeah.
Right.
Slippery When Wet.
Yeah. So this is the first kind of original.
Art. Yeah. Well, there is something at the sign company there,
Sure.
that somebody does I think what we're talking about here is that the sign company has a continual style that they're in because of the tools, and so you're kind of limited, but it's always a nice poster the way it's done. So this was new because the first ones were large silk screens, which were probably I think 16 by 28, something like that, on a fairly good piece of paper, and silkscreen in someone's garage, and not the signage company, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was
Mm-hmm.
a different sort of thing. And then they were able to, you know, make a litho print out of it, but they could never get the red, the orange, or any of those colors, you know,
Yeah.
to look like the thing. So the person who was doing that printing job for them just kind of never got it together. You know, the orange was never
Right.
the right orange, and the pink was not.
Originally.
Yeah,
I mean, until
originally,
you
yeah.
started being able to.
Yeah, and they're playing authentic Hawaiian music. You know, this is not Dick Dale.
Yeah. No.
That is a commercial thing.
Right.
So within the bohemian world of surfing, you know, it was still hooked to Hawaii, to these guys who had been there, you know, and they brought that back. And it became customary, you know, that, you know.
So people like Walter Hoffman and.
I don't know much about them, you know.
Other classic examples.
Yes, right. They're older.
They're older.
Yeah.
They were there
10
in
years
the
older,
early
something like that.
50s
Yeah.
in Hawaii. And
yeah. So
pioneered
so a lot of that came in that way.
But right back to Euxin, still Walter gets out under the Palapa.
Yeah.
He's 80 now. And
Yeah, and the you know, so surfing is kind of straight and traditional and has a folklore to it and all that, and you know, even in front of Severson in 62, 63, I mean, the Beach Boys and all that was like, it was coming, but it was like, ooh, you know.
Well, the Beach Boys particularly, for those of us who lived,
Yeah.
I mean, because that was that whole cultural thing of even in Laguna Santa Ana was another universe, let alone Whittier
Yeah.
or something. But this was part of what was creating that cross-pollination and the people coming from inland down to the...
But later in life, what happens that you understand is that surf music really comes out of Fender, you know.
Sure.
And Fender is this Orange County company, you know, and Dick Dale is
Right there,
you know,
yeah. Oh,
and a couple other guys. So that's all, you know, its own subculture.
Where
whatever, yeah.
Gibson was somewhere else.
Yeah. And so when the hippie thing comes, you know, through all these shows with Hendrix and all this equipment, Marshalls and wah-wah pedals and, you know, all this technology, you know, gets shifted up to San Francisco, you know, and they're able to hold notes and feedback and all that, you know, and so it's really surf music going folk art, you know.
Yeah.
And ballads, you know, where they could actually they sang stories, you know, that you could piece together in metaphor or whatever with the music, and the equipment was very exotic at that time, and they were able to force it to be James Gurley, the way he played his guitar, you know, the fish, you know, I mean.
Well, artists were driving that.
Yeah.
You know, that need as you were starting to play louder and learning what happens when you turn it to...
I have to pee.
Sure.